back to Children's Church. I'm so glad to have you here with me. And all this month, we're going to be talking about prophets. Today, we're in the book of Nehemiah, which is one of the history books or one of the books of the prophets, depending on who you ask. I'm actually going to read you the foreword of this so you can have some context. And we're going to jump around a little bit because we're talking about Nehemiah, the guy, and what he did. But I'm going to give you a little rundown here first of what my Bible has to say about this book. Nehemiah is the 11th historical book, and it's named for its main character, who was a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. Nehemiah lived at the same time as Ezra the priest and Malachi the prophet. Ezra and Nehemiah were once one book instead of two. The book tells how King Artaxerxes allowed Nehemiah to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the wall around the city. Without his wall, Jerusalem could easily be attacked and defeated again. When Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, he gathered the people together to start building in spite of their enemies. When they were threatened, Nehemiah ordered half the men to work while the other half stood guard. The builders worked with tools in their hands and a sword strapped to their waist. With God on their side, they rebuilt the wall in 52 days. Who wrote the book? No one knows for sure. Although some say it was Ezra, others say it was written by the chronicler, the same person who wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles. When both Ezra and Nehemiah were written around 400 BC. Now, let's talk. I'm going to summarize. So many words. So Nehemiah is raised in captivity in, which empire is this at the time? City of Susa. That's the Persian Empire. Yes. Xerxes, that makes sense. So he's raised in captivity. He's the cupbearer to King
Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes. I keep having to look back at it. And Nehemiah is good at what he does. He's faithful, he's honest. So the king notices that he is downtrodden, and he cares. And when he asks him what is troubling him, he tells him about his home. He was taken from Israel, and the city of Jerusalem, their capital, was destroyed in a siege. There is no wall around it. His people are vulnerable. The king allows Nehemiah to leave and take others with him to go back to his homeland and rebuild it to protect it from enemies. This is not a popular move because people really like invading Jerusalem. In fact, 3 other factions come against them in order to stop them. So when in the foreword it says that they worked with a sword at their hips, that's not an exaggeration. They were ready for attack at all times, but believed what they were doing was important because Nehemiah was sent by not the king, but God to do this. He was God's chosen person for the hour. And he was at the same time as Ezra and the prophet Malachi. That's why he's in these lessons about the prophets. But secondarily, I chose Nehemiah today because it is our Independence Day weekend. So let's talk about independence in the Bible. The Bible is mostly a constant story of invasions, captivity, and freedom over and over again in a cycle. So at this time, many Israelites were held captive in the Persian Empire, and their home was in disrepair. It was unsafe. By letting Nehemiah go back and rebuild, it moves us to a separate part in the cycle. I am going to read you some of Nehemiah's prayer. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before God in heaven. I said, Yahweh, the God in heaven, the great and awe-inspiring God, who keeps his gracious covenant with those who love him and keep his commands. Let your eyes be open and your ears attentive to your servant's prayer that I now pray to you. Day and night, for your servants, the Israelites, I confess the sins we have committed against you. Both I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted corruptly towards you and have not kept your commands, statutes, and ordinances that you gave to your servant Moses. Please remember what you commanded your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and carefully observe my commands, even though your exiles were banished to the ends of the earth, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place where I chose to have my name dwell. They are your servants and your people. You redeemed them by great power and strong hand. Please, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to that of your servants who delight to revere your name. Give your servant success today and have compassion on him in the presence of this man. At this time, I was the king's cupbearer. Now we have a direct recording of what Nehemiah prays, and it's even written in the first person. I am the king's cupbearer. The rest of the book is not like that. Well, actually it is. It's all written in a first-person perspective. Like during the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was set before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had never been sad in his presence, so the king said to me, "Why are you sad when you aren't sick? This is nothing but depression." I was overwhelmed with fear and replied to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should I not be sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" So this is where the king gives him permission to go back. They went back to build the wall and rebuild the gates that protected God's people. In his prayer, he asked God to bring them back out of exile, bring his people back together, those who were following him. They were flung far away because they sinned against God and they ignored his ways. Nehemiah is asking God to bring them back together, bring them back to the freedom of being in the place where God's name dwells, which is probably my favorite sentence in this book. That is a very heavy thing to say. This is the place where you have chosen your name to dwell. Going back was the only thing Nehemiah could think about, because that was his homeland. It is where the name of God dwelled. And he led his people back to freedom. He led them back to rebuild what was lost and collect the exiles who had walked away from God. Nehemiah and Ezra, who we'll talk about next week or the week after. I'm sorry, I planned these in advance and I don't remember where I put him. But Ezra and Ezekiel, Malachi, not Ezekiel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi, there are 3 different books in the Bible, are all contemporaries. All at the same time, these men were bringing people back to the covenant the Israelites had with God. And they did it in 3 different ways. Nehemiah helped the people come back physically and improve the physical safety. And then we have Ezra, who brought back the knowledge of God, the scrolls and the words and the teachings that they had lost while they were in exile. And then Malachi brings back the words of God. He is a prophet and he brings back God's word directly to his people. So we'll be talking about them this month because I find them very, very interesting. And I would like to tell you about them. But today we're going to talk about Nehemiah. He was just a simple man, but he was called by God. And he led his people back and offered them back protection and their place away out of exile and back into their home where the name of God dwelled. That's what I want to talk about this week. We'll be talking about history and prophet books all this month. So a lot of Old Testament teaching. I'm very excited. We've been in the New Testament a lot lately. And I really like this section of the Bible full of history and prophets. So we'll be talking about that more, and I will see you then.